Welcome to the Generative Edge, the podcast that keeps you up to date with the latest news and events in the world of generative AI. I'm Stephanie, and I am a consultant at Deloitte Central Europe.
I'm Brandon Eychaner, and I'm the Natural Language Processing and Generative AI Practice Lead for Deloitte Central Europe.
And today we are going to be talking about one of the most common themes, points of discussion of generative AI, and that is productivity.
Yeehaw.
Yeah. I think, Brandon, every time I have a conversation with someone about generative AI, the first metric that comes up is how much more productive everyone is using generative AI tools. So what I'd like to do is just break that down a bit, because to me, productivity means so many different things. So in the actual technical sense for generative AI, what is productivity and how do we talk about it and measure it?
Oh, what an easy question.
Yeah, I give you all the easy questions.
Actually, let's take a step back. Productivity actually isn't necessarily related to generative AI specifically, but it's actually about the task that you're doing, right?
Yeah.
Very broadly speaking, we talk about how quickly something can be done, the quality of what's being done. So let's say that I wanted to bake a cake or something, and I baked a really terrible cake. So I've still baked the cake, but it's terrible and nobody's going to buy it, right? In the same way, you have tasks in the corporate world, which are software development or creating a proposal request or something like this that takes a lot of time, and you can still do the work, but maybe all the information in it is incorrect. So when we talk about productivity, it's sort of a mixture of how fast was it done, how much did it cost to create, and then how high is the quality of the output of that work.
Yeah, I think that's a really good baseline, because at least for me, when I'm like, oh, I need to be more productive. Yes. Okay, my time and energy costs the company a certain amount. Of course, that's part of it. But at the same time, like, I know that the tasks that usually eat up the most of my time are not the ones that I usually get the most joy out of either. So of course, of course, at that point, it takes longer because you're like dreading the task. And again,
are you telling me you don't like to go through your email inbox and respond to everything?
It's part of the job. So of course, but I think this is kind of the use case of generative AI is that, it creates new content, right? You can ask it to help you create that proposal or an email template or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But when we're actually discussing the marked increase or the marked output of generative AI, we use this term of productivity.
Yeah.
So it makes us more productive.
Yeah.
So can we break that down a bit? Because yes, it is saving my time, it is saving my energy, but what does it mean when we see these stats everywhere that, generative AI makes somebody, 40% more productive? Like, what does that mean?
You hit the magic number, by the way.
Yeah.
So there actually is a study floating around, let's say a news story floating around that a lot of people tend to post to like LinkedIn or whatever that say that generative AI somehow increases your productivity by 40% and that it's supported by this study. Now, I've actually looked at the paper that article and that news is based on.
Okay.
So it's a paper that comes out of Harvard Business School, right? And the primary investigator, his name is Fabrizio Dell'Acqua, with a group of other collaborators. And what they did was put together a bunch of tasks that are typical in a corporate world where you're writing emails or responding to proposals, kind of the stuff that I just mentioned, actually.
Yeah.
And it was the tasks were designed to mimic what their daily work looked like.
Sure.
And they said that they brought in a senior executive from one of these consulting companies to like basically verify that the tasks that they set out in the study were similar to what the people working for them were doing in their corporate jobs. Okay, so what they found using a population size of like 750 people was if you have somebody who's doing a task versus someone who's doing a task assisted by AI, in this case GPT-4, then the people who were working with GPT-4 were able to complete tasks 25% faster. Okay. They were able to get through around 12% more tasks than the people who were not assisted. And they were also able to have outputs that were 40% higher quality. So this means like an acceptance criteria. So basically after they did all this stuff with GPT and they completed their task, they send it to human evaluators, and the human evaluators said 40% more of the time that work was of acceptable quality.
Okay.
Yeah. So then we get to this headline, which is 40% more productive, which is not the case. That's not what the paper found. What the paper found is that they were doing things 25% faster, which is one part of the metric of productivity, but it's not the whole story, right? And there is one caveat there to be aware of, and I think this is more important and doesn't get any traction in the news, which is that the people who are using generative AI or a large language model to assist in those tasks, they were also 19% more likely to get a wrong answer on shorter tasks.
Okay.
So they make a distinction in the paper between two different kinds of tasks. One of them is in the frontier, and they describe the frontier as like the things that AI is currently capable of.
Okay.
So, summarizing emails or coming up with templates, that kind of stuff.
The things we know that GPT is good at
Yes.
and excels at. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So that's inside the frontier. Then there's outside the frontier, which are things that require a lot of subject matter expertise or that are really complex and require multiple steps in order to get through. The things that are inside the frontier, totally great.
Yeah.
You can expect a huge productivity increase with correct answers, but outside the frontier, that's where you see that 15 to 25% drop in accuracy for somebody who's working on a task. So even though they might know what they're doing, they just kind of trust the outputs of the large language model, and the quality of that output is really low comparatively. Yeah.
So this is just another really great point of doing due diligence and not just accepting everything that GPT spits out at you at first glance.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes.
But I think this is really interesting to me because, I'm a consultant, right? I spend a lot of time writing things and creating new things. And so if I know that, the things that GPT is really good at are going to get me faster, better results, of course, I want to use that, right? Because it saves me time and energy, and I don't have to focus as much, and I can spend my time, my expertise time doing things that I'm actually better at, right? More creative tasks, things like that. But at the same time, if I'm using it to be somewhat experimental, or I'm like testing the boundaries of what it's capable of, I might end up putting more time into said task because I'm verifying the outputs and I'm really trying to make sure that whatever I'm producing with the help of GPT is actually going to be accurate.
Exactly.
In that case.
Yeah.
Okay.
And this is actually borne out in the data. So like McKinsey quarterly came out with a report in, I think it was like March. And it was all about the human side of generative AI. I think the title is actually the human side of generative AI.
Good citing of sources, definitely.
So they were describing how people who are using generative AI to help complete their tasks are finding more and more that they need to focus on the human sort of like emotional work rather than the technical work that they've been doing. So they might have spent a lot of time reading and writing beforehand, and now a lot of that can be automated. But that means that a larger focus of their job is actually communicating that information effectively, having conversations with people, dealing with project management work that isn't able to currently be automated by AI. And so it's really important, even for those people that are more productive, that they need to move that extra time somewhere else, and they need to focus more on those kinds of skills.
Well, that to me, it makes sense, right? So like I said, just using myself as an example, as a consultant, like I don't necessarily want to spend all my time reading a bunch of stuff, right? But it's important, right? So I do it. And now with GPT, I can get summaries. I can really like just even some models, some use cases even tell you where they found the information, things like that. So it really does speed up my time that I spend on it. So that's where I spend a lot of my time and energy before GPT. Now with it, I can focus on the things that I'm actually good at and the things I excel at, which I would like to maybe say is like communication and trying to make people understand and work in the same way. So I'm a project manager by nature, right?
Yeah.
So I then get more fulfillment from those tasks, and I'm not spending my time doing kind of the soul draining work of reading through 1,000 reports or something like that. Okay. Which makes me more efficient because I'm excited to do whatever tasks are in my docket because
for sure. And if you're doing less of the stuff that you don't enjoy doing, you're probably also less likely to experience burnout, which also correlates with lower productivity. So if you're having more fun at work and a lot of the things that you hate are automated or made easier for you, then you can expect a productivity increase in terms of not just being able to like output more work, but also higher quality work in some cases, if it's inside of that frontier I described. And also maybe hopefully avoiding some level of burnout just because you don't have so many tasks that you're super unhappy about.
Yeah. So right now, I mean, this conversation feels very centered on, I mean, obviously we work at a consulting firm, so it feels very much about knowledge work. Let's call it desk work even. So people who can work on computers all the time. Obviously, that's not going to translate across every industry, maybe parts of each industry, but definitely not 100% of all industries.
Yeah.
So what is the differentiation of where we see, for our listeners, what industries do we really see the biggest productivity increase or impact with generative AI use cases in production?
Yeah. So if memory serves, I don't remember where this report was from, but the majority of the productivity increase is expected to be in software development and in coding, especially with these coding assistants.
That does make sense. Okay.
And not just in terms of like the percentage of work output, but basically because it's such an expensive line of work, it's very expensive to have somebody code, and do software development. Any productivity increase in that sector is going to translate to a much larger overall increase in percentage points in terms of like revenue, right? But of course, it's not going to sow your seeds. It's not going to harvest crops for you. It's
not picking corn.
No, it's probably not going to be able to do any like, architecture diagrams of buildings or new machinery or something, at least anytime soon. Where there might be an exception there would be like 3D protein modeling or, sequencing genes and figuring out how they interact, how the proteins that are produced interact with each other, that kind of thing, drug interactions, et cetera. But I guess time will tell.
Yeah. And actually, to me, that makes sense because obviously, there is probably an element of software engineering or coding in basically every industry at this point, maybe very few exceptions to that rule.
Yeah.
So, of course, quote unquote, every industry will see some sort of boost, but not equally.
Exactly. Right.
So for us, knowledge workers, we're going to see huge shifts in our daily tasks and outputs. But like we said, GenAI is not picking our corn for us anytime soon, at least.
Right. No, I would say like probably the biggest thing for us as like knowledge workers or consultants or whatever is access to information.
Yeah.
So like organizations have a ton of information. Everybody's making Word documents and Excel tables all day, every day, new PowerPoints, new data governance structures.
Don't we know it? Yeah.
And it's so hard to remember where all those documents are and what the information is inside of them. And it's not necessarily the case that like we have a new way of accessing that information, but just a faster way of accessing it. So if I was interacting with like a co-pilot or something that's built on top of my organization's data, I can just ask a question, where does this information lie? And then it can come up with a list of documents. Not necessarily generative AI, by the way. That's actually technology that's existed for a while. But because generative AI is so popular now, these like semantic search systems are super, super popular. And so like basically every organization that I can think of at the moment, every client that I have is working on building out these search systems to make it possible to then build the generative AI on top of it. So
Gen AI is kind of like the hot sauce on top of the
Exactly.
solution.
Yeah, exactly.
Speaking of hot sauce, I think that is a great place to end the conversation for today. So thank you, Brandon, for telling us all about productivity.
Thank you.
Working smarter, not harder. And thanks everyone for listening. Tune in next week for another episode. And don't forget to generate responsibly. Thank you for listening to The Generative Edge, a Deloitte Central Europe and AWS production. Your hosts are Brandon Eychaner, Vyasaraj Kulkarni, and Donovan Spronk. Our show is executive produced by Stephanie Cohen, Vanch Luthra, Ian Masters, and the Deloitte studio in Prague. Head writers are Stephanie Cohen and Brandon Eychaner. Our sound and audio engineer is Wojtek Krasa, who also serves as our editor and videographer. Michal Trusina is our graphic designer. Our marketing and social media managed by Stephanie Cohen and the Deloitte studio in Prague. And our theme song was written and produced by Jakub Vlasic. Don't forget to rate and subscribe on Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for tuning in.